I call myself an old school modeler. I taught for 38 years, and I started in 1973, back when these computer things did not even exist. Well, they existed, but they weren't huge as they are today. I'm very old school. I like to face-to-face teach. I retired in 2012 because education was getting just too technical. I could do what I had to do on a computer. I could do my grades. I could respond to a parent's email if they emailed me, which they never did. And it was just getting too technical. Like I said, I'm very face-to-face. This is what I'm doing. But in a way, that also is reflected in the way that I model. Very quick history. I grew up in South Portland in a house that faced, we were three houses up from Main Street, Route 1. In those days, you could look out over the Catholic cemetery there on Route 1, and you could see the main line coming into Rigby. And
Can you have you move to the center? Some of the folks in Zoom world are having a harder time hearing you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
long, but I think I can
Great. There you go. Right there. It's great.
Well, it's then, am I gonna look into that?
Here.
That's really there. If that's, yeah, okay. Anyway, I could see the Rigby, the main central main line going in, and the first car that I remembered seeing was a New Haven boxcar with a big NH. And I mean, that bang, it hit my head, and I loved trains ever since. And that would have been 1954, 55. I was 4 or 5 years old. Anyway, I never got into model railroading seriously till after I graduated from college, although one of the folks I'm going to mention here in a minute did inspire me in a way. If I had to name one person who got me turned on to model railroading, very likely it would have been the guy who was, I would say, featured in this issue of Railroad Model Craftsman. This is April 1964. 50 cents. I have no idea what it's worth today. As you can see, it's been opened and closed a few times. The one bit of model railroading I did in college was based on an article in an even older RMC by this guy. I don't know if you can read his name. Right there. What is it, sir?
E.L. Moore.
E.L. Moore. How many of you remember him?
Yeah.
Okay, couple. E.L. Moore was kind of an eccentric individual. He modeled some odd things. Sometimes they were named sort of strangely. But he was a very avid modeler. He did 80 or 90 articles over the course of his career, his writing career. And almost all of them were made of wood. All right, now, any idea what might have been his favorite wood type? Balsa. How did he create in the drawing? It's too small, but in this photo right here, you're looking at an overhead view, and you can see that it looks like a board and batten siding. How would he have created that?
A razor blade.
A wood burner. A wood burner. Burning pencil. All right, the only one I ever had as a kid, you know, the blade was fairly wide, so it had to have been a very narrow blade. Or maybe he just, you know, filed it down to be very narrow. I don't know. But anyway, his stuff, the materials were basic. But as a kid growing up, we had the Hobby Center on Congress Street in Portland, but you know, I couldn't afford to go buy basswood and all that good stuff at that point. So I played with balsa wood, and I did use a razor blade, cutting my finger a number of times, as you might figure. But it was this model, which he titled Branch Line Station, that really caught my attention as a scratch builder when I started to get into it. And I kept a lot of the old magazines that he was in. And I have actually built 4 models, 4 versions of this. And one of them, the latest version, is here. And I'll talk about it a little bit in a couple of minutes. It's different. You'll notice that the one that he did was on pilings. And the first three that I did was built that way, but I decided I didn't want to do that with this one, so we'll get back to him. Like anything else, inspiration comes, it's what gets you going. As a teacher, I always try to get my kids involved with something that caught their attention. And that's the best way you can educate anybody. And when you're doing something like this, you're educating yourself. That's what it is. What a scratch building essentially is, in my mind, is creating your own kit. You're creating your own kit. You have to come up with the materials, you have to come up with the pieces, you have to make sure that they go together the way they should. You know, your level of realism is up to you. It depends on how you want to do it. But I think the better you get at it, the more experienced you get at it, the more you want to be as realistic and as authentic as you can. One of the things that you need to have is a plan for what you're going to do. And most of, you can see all of what I've got here, the rolling stock, the 5 pieces of rolling stock are all based on the main 2 footers. And they were 2 feet. They were, if I were going to do them in absolute typical style, it would be OM2, O scale, narrow gauge, 2-foot gauge. These are all OM30. And for those of you who don't know what that is O scale, narrow gauge, 30-inch gauge. And what they use is HO gauge track. Okay, it's HO gauge track. It's track that's HO gauge. If you've got an HO layout, the new guy, when you get it built, I could stick this on top and you could back an HO GP7 and haul it anywhere you want, as long as the clearances are okay on the side. I don't want to damage anything. Because obviously these are bigger than HO cars. But the gauge is the same. It's HO. In O scale, excuse me, HO gauge is 30 inches. So you're making basically a 6-inch sacrifice to model the main 2-footers accurately. And all of these cars, and except for the buggy, and I'll talk about that in a little while, all of these cars are accurate models of main main 2-footer. Actually, it was the main central when everybody could finish buying everybody out. But they're accurate models of main 2-foot rolling stock, with the only difference being the gauge. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you address that and so forth. So where do the plans come from? Well, railroad model craftsman. There's another railroad model craftsman. This is much later. And gee, I wonder where this might have showed up on that. I'll talk more about this later. But where did those plans come from? I've got to find the correct. Nope, wrong one. I'm out. Here we go. I think this is it. Sometimes, no, that's not it. Maybe I didn't bring it. Anyway, if any of you have ever seen the ON30 annual, this is based on what these models are. The editor of this is a guy named Chris Lane, and quite a number of years ago, he did a set of plans for this. They were based on what was called the Jack's Cabin tank. This was on the Denver and Rio Grande 3-foot narrow gauge. I can't remember exactly where the branch was, but there were a couple of tanks that they didn't, not much business on the line, and they didn't need the big 50,000-gallon tanks that they had for standard narrow gauge. But Chris Lane did a set of plans for this in O scale. And I decided, I actually built a kit of one of these a number of years ago. There's been kits available for quite a while. And I decided I would build it using Chris's plans. And this is where being a teacher came into play a little bit too. I had the plans. I was teaching at Erskine Academy in South China. And I went down to the shop teacher's space with the set of plans. And I asked him, what are the chances that one of your kids could get me a piece of wood, grind it all down to this rough size. So he says, yeah, no problem. So a couple of classes later, a couple of periods, Mr. Bennett, here you go. Perfect, absolutely perfect in size. And he had actually, I said, if he could go just slightly smaller, because I'm gonna have to laminate the timbers around the outside. It was just perfect, absolutely perfect. The kid was, I had the class that I was teaching, give him a round of applause, and he appreciated that. So plants could come in a number of different ways. The stock car that I had up there, I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but there's a guy out in Ohio named Gary Kohler who used to produce this magazine. It went through several iterations, Maine 2-foot Quarterly, Maine 2-foot Digest. But this basically in the fall of 2007 focused on stock cars. And there was an article on building a G-scale Sandy River stock car. Okay, now this is in G-scale. Imagine this twice the size, more or less, give or take. It was built in wood, as you can see, and there was a set of plans in O-scale. So, I mean, what else can I ask for? But the thing is, sometimes you look at things, and I looked at this is the model that was built with these plans, and there were a bunch of other photos. And as I was going through the plans, I'm sure you can't see this because it's really tiny, but on the where the sideboards were, these little things that says open, and then open, and then open. So what it was showing you where the side stakes were on the car and where the openings were. Well, I didn't realize that there should be another opening. I'm sorry, there should be two solid stakes across at the bottom. I don't know if you've ever looked at a stock car, but in doing the research after I realized that I kind of screwed up. No stock car that I've ever seen pictures of ever had an opening right at the floor level. It was always solid. And somebody told me once that it was so the cows or whatever you were hauling in there couldn't get their feet underneath that stake or siding thing and somehow fall over or whatever, which on these 2-foot stock cars especially would have been somewhat interesting. In a 2,000-pound bull who fell over, it could have caused a problem. So after I finished this, a couple of years, I realized I had to do something. So I cut some styrene. By the way, this is all styrene. I'll talk about it in a minute. And I cut some pieces and kind of wedged them in behind with tweezers and glued it in and then painted it, and it looks fine. But again, it's one of those things, you can do it to the level of authenticity that you want. And sometimes you realize that you screwed up. So anyway, another set of plans. Sometimes you create your own plans. Oh, I did bring it. All right, there's Chris Lane's plans in O-scale for Jack's cabin. I know I had it, but there's something else I did. No, there isn't. Okay, never mind. All right. Okay, the other. For 14 years, as when I was teaching at Mountain View High School up in Thorndike, home of the Belfast and Moosehead Lake, I was a conductor on the Belfast and Moosehead Lake, and that was my summer job. And we would every day we ran out of Belfast out to Burnham Junction, through the Y, back to Burnham Junction to Unity, and we would go by a place called Winnicook. And I was able to come up with a photograph of the Winnicook flag stop taken by Linwood Moody. Anybody ever hear of him? He is the 2-foot guru. This is an original print made from a negative that I was able to get from a guy who used to live in Palermo. He's fallen off the grid, so to speak, but he gave me, I could not believe it at the time, he had a huge collection of Moody's negatives and a few slides, and he gave me the whole package because he didn't really know where the negative for this picture was. Gave me the whole package. Now, if you think about Linwood Moody, that was potentially thousands of dollars worth of photographic material. He said, blow up what you need and just get it back to me. So I had an outfit in Waterville blow up this print. And this is the original Winnicook flagstone. So I talked to Chris Lane, who, again, the editor of the On3 Annual, about doing an article. And here's the article. This is the 2011 On3 Annual. And I actually did two versions. I scratch built two versions of this station. One I did in styrene. And this is the one. You don't believe me? Here's the styrene on the bottom. Okay. And one I figured, well, I would detail the interior. The other one I built with wood, basswood, right? Basswood. And I did not detail the interior, but with the styrene version I did. I had no idea what the interior looked like, except from a set of plans in an old magazine, and I have forgotten the name of the magazine. I should have written it down there. But here are the plans that were in that magazine. It was a short living magazine that came out in the 80s, I think, or in 90s. But this is the set of plans that I used. And here is a side view. That's the original print, the Moody print that was used. And then up above it is a diagram of Burnham Junction. And anybody ever want to take a look at that, you may do so later on. So working with the detail parts that I had, and all of the doors and windows are granite lined. And I'll talk more about parts in a minute too, but I'll take care of it now. Granite line no longer exists. However, almost all of the pieces that they produce over the years are now being produced by San Juan Details. And it's San Juan Model Works, there's San Juan something else, but there are also San Juan Details. And they have almost everything that Granite Line did. So I made up a set of plans of my own to use the windows that I had, which are pretty close to the prototype, and the door, which is pretty good. And when Chris Lane published the article, he created a set of plans based on the ones that I had come up with and published them on their website, on the On3 website. And I went online when I was setting this up, and this wasn't, they weren't there anymore because this was like 13 years ago. So, but anyway, the article basically, and this comes back to what I said about creating your own parts. When you're starting a scratch build, you're building each section as it goes, and you have to basically create your own materials. Now, again, I use styrene for this. I use wood for the other one. You build the wall sections, you frame the walls in if you're going to detail it, which I did slightly. I will pass this around. Be very careful, please. It doesn't weigh that much, but there was a diagram in the plans that sort of showed the interior. And I wanted to create it as much as I could, and it's reasonably close. But to do that, you're basically creating your own parts. You're getting your own stuff together.
Bob,
Yeah.
do you ever use Tichy windows or Grant Line windows just different?
Tichy, I have used them, and they're very good. They're just as good as Grant Line. Actually, they include glazing in each window kit. They usually come in packages of 4, and there's glazing there, cut exactly to size. When you're doing a Grant Line part, you have to kind of, cut it and make it fit, which is no big deal. But yeah, Tichy is good, and as far as I know, they're still available. I used to buy some when I go to the Springfield show, but I haven't been there forever.
But quality similar.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, back to plans just for a second more here. If you're looking, again, this is for the main 2-footers. Now, I know that probably very few, if any of you are into that part of modeling, but again, Gary Kohler, guy from Ohio, has over the years, and I'm talking 20 to 25 years, printed a lot of stuff on the main 2-footers, and there's plans, and I have used a number of them. Also available is our magazines like the Narrow Gauge and Short Line Gazette. This is one of a series of plans that were done by Jim Dunlop, who is long deceased. He was a huge factor in making main 2-foot modeling a big thing. And he always drew for the boxcar here. He's got he has a bunch of, I guess, major figures that he'd like to have or something. So they're always standing around either in the door of a boxcar or on the platform of a station or something. For nothing else, it gave you basically a sense of scale. You know, what does a 6-foot guy look like compared to one of these little tiny cars? And they were little tiny. One of the set of plans, here's Sandy River 138. This is basically what I used to build this car. I didn't number it 138. I built 3 of these together. They're all made of styrene. Styrene is, how many of you built something from styrene? Okay. How many have built a modern freight car from styrene? Okay. Number of hands is, I only got 3. 4. All right. That comes to another point that I was going to make in talking about scratch building and so forth. The model building that is kind of a not a major factor in the hobby. In other words, if you're modeling something pre-1950, if you're modeling narrow gauge, if you're modeling old cars, the idea of using styrene and scribed wood is much simpler for those subjects than they are for modern stuff. I have never built a model using styrene of anything beyond 1950. But one thing, all of the rivets. Now I know you can buy the decal rivets today. What's the name of the outfit that does those? Yes, thank you. I couldn't think of it. And that makes it a lot easier. But if you're into scratch building at all, it's a lot easier to simulate stuff that comes from quite a ways back, simply because the materials fit that time frame a lot better. This is all styrene. It's scribed. Evergreen styrene is the big source. There are others, but Evergreen, I've never used anything but. When you look at the plan, it doesn't show the underframe, okay? And when you start playing with the difference between ON2 and ON30, that's where you have to make the compromise, because with the gauge being slightly wider, you have to provide enough space between the side frames and the center beams to allow adequate rotation of the trucks, okay? If these were 2 foot and the center beams were out where they should be, according to the prototype, there wouldn't be enough room. So you have to make a compromise there. But other than that, that's the only compromise that I've ever made making ON30 stuff within reason. Yeah.
You figured that out ahead of time, or did you put the frames where they're supposed to be defined and didn't?
I was able to know what I was doing ahead of time. Yeah, the first ON30 stuff I ever had was a Mount Blue Models kit. They're based on, the guy is on Cape Cod, I think, or down close to Cape Cod. He's very active at the Phillips, the Sandy River Historical Society in Phillips. But he gives you, his kits are set up so that you can space those center beams either prototypically for the 2 foot gauge or slightly different for ON30. And that just, that's in my head and always will be. one of the issues that you find if you're modeling with styrene and using modeling a wooden car, is that it obviously doesn't weather the way that wood does. With wood, you can paint it and then you can sand it off with a little bit of a sanding stick, or you can take a knife blade and weather it slightly and all that. Well, styrene doesn't work quite that way. I use various types of chalk to weather. That's what these little marks are here down the side. If you look at an old boxcar, it's going to weather. The paint will peel. The paint will come off, and it's never going to look exactly the way it did when it rolled out of the shops. Even the roof walks back in the old days, the roof walks were almost always wood, and true or false, they were never painted. True or false? How many think they were never painted? True. Why not? You're right.
Slippery.
Exactly. The paint in wooden on a wood surface, the paint would have made it slippery. I always told my students, we'd get to railroads talking about the 1800s, and I'd say, just imagine this. You're a brakeman. It's midwinter. It's snowing hard. You don't have any cell phone. You don't have any electric flashlight. You don't have anything. And there's no air brakes. It's early on. Okay. And you got to stop the train real fast. So you're on top of this car. You take your brake plug, you stick it down through the brake wheel, crank it, and then jump to the next car. And it's absolutely pitch black. You have no idea if you're going to hit the car or not. Railroading was one of the most dangerous jobs in the history of mankind until things modernized somewhat. So again, back to this. What I do when I'm working with styrene and I want to simulate basically unpainted raw wood, just take a very fine grained X-Acto saw, run it down the length of the wood, put a little bit of grain into it, paint it with a woodish sort of color. Now, this is old float quill paint, which is no longer available, but you can do with, you can find it. You can find stuff that looks just the same. And so you're simulating unpainted wood over the on the roof wall. Anyway, that's plans. I'm not really following my my stuff here, but that's okay. You wouldn't know that if I didn't say it. A couple more plans. Another boxcar. Yeah. Come on. There we go. And two more plans of a car that was probably the most common on the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. Pulpwood racks. Okay. And they came in different lengths. This one obviously is a bit shorter. This is a 28 footer. This is a 32 footer. And this is where I made the switch from styrene to wood. Yeah. Here is a 28-foot pulp rack based on the plans from here. Pretty accurate. This is all wood, and I'm going to put my hand over it and I'll show you why later on. One of the problems that you have when you're building a flat car is that it doesn't weigh very much. In a box car or a closed car, you can put weights. I use tire weights. The self-adhesive jobs, you can hide them in the end, and they work great for weighing down the car, so it will track better. But on a flat car, gee, where am I going to put those? No place. So one of the things that I've come up with over the years is taking, and I'm not a carpenter, so my dad was a carpenter, but taking fairly substantial nails that will fit at the same size as the center beams. And you see the nails in there? They're hopefully hard to see. That's the whole idea, but there's 4 in there, about probably 1.5 inches long, from just about the cross beams here and here. See them? And they do give it a fairly good weight. And then if you can get a load into it, that also puts some additional weight. Again, the center beams are inward. The trucks have enough rotation. This is all wood. The flooring is wood. Individual. What I do is I have a jig that I made out of styrene, and to do the flooring or the beams, glue those together, lay it down on a piece of a couple of layers of Scotch tape, double-sided tape, and then do the flooring on the top from individual boards. And you do have to play with it a little bit when you start from each end. All right, come to the center, and you may have to put a slightly narrower board in, but it works. And then you get to do the most ridiculous thing, which is figure out how to put those stakes in. Now, these stakes are basically 3" by 3". It's HO scale in the packaging that I got, Northeastern 6 by 6 basswood. So you have to cut the stakes using the plans the correct length. You have to add all of the stake pockets, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on each side. And then you have to build the sides of the ramps. And it gets kind of interesting because the Sandy River, in order to keep things from coming apart, used, and they're really hard to see. I don't think anybody's going to be able to see them, but they use wire to hold the end pieces and the side frames together. I'll wander down here. He's right in here. And then, of course, to keep them from falling apart across the center, they use wire across, connecting each of the side stakes. And that's what I use is wire. Now, obviously, they use really major, I don't know how big it was, probably like that. This is very fine wire. And Grant Line, and I think they still have them, used to make an NBW casting, nut bolt washer casting, for those of you who don't know what that is, with a hole in the middle. And it's perfect because you put one here, you put one here, you cut a piece of wood, a piece of wire, thread it into one through the other, and then snip it off and put a drop of super glue there, and it's there. And then to make it look even more realistic, you bend it all over the place, because you can imagine when they loaded these things, they just threw the stuff in, and they didn't care whether it sat there correctly or not. Now, the load. That's why I've been having my hand over the thing here. You may wonder, some of you who are up close might have seen this. Anybody got any idea what it is? Yep. The wood is from some kind of bush that we had on our lawn 30 years ago, and I spent, I think, 2 days. It was dying, and so I spent a couple of days snipping off, I think, every freaking branch on the bush, and then using my chopper, my Northwest Shoreline chopper, set to about 4 foot length, cutting up every single one of those. And I still have, this is one, I've only got 2 of these cars, one of which is unloaded. But I figured if I wanted to put a load in, why not make a jig? So I got some old pieces of styrene, and each entrance here, each hole fits one of these pieces. And there's actually 2 sitting on top of each other on each end. And I looked for a long time at pictures of the prototypes. And sometimes you saw the wood in the center because they loaded it through the center. They just throw it in from the center, and there would be a guy back here who would stack it. Probably you're talking 3 or 4 men loading one of these cars. But anyway, sometimes it was sitting sideways the way I've got it here. Sometimes they were along the length of the car. So I figured, what the heck, I do one sideways. And but each of these fits a section of that. And you want to talk about boring, gluing little pieces of wood into one of these, and inevitably it's not going to stick perfectly. So you pop it out and it'll fall apart, or at least bend a little bit. So you take a toothpick and put some glue in and put a weight on it. And this is probably a week's worth of work for one load. where the prototype guys probably loaded the whole car in like half an hour. So, whatever. Okay. Again, I'm kind of off topic here, but that's all right. The other plan that I want to show you, well, that's two. You find, oh, this is back to the stock car. One of the guys that I also been inspired by over the time is Trevor Marshall. He is a Canadian and he has modeled a bunch of different stuff. He started, I think, back in the 70s or 80s modeling the B&M, a branch line like the Conoco branch up in that part of the world. Then he went to the main 2-footers and did an article in RMC about building a stock car. And what I said about scratch building is coming up with your own kits. This is what he used an old Sandy River Car Shop's kit to build that stock car. And that's what it looked like when it came out of the box, right here. And talk about scratch building. The only thing that's different from this and scratch building is that the parts are pre-cut. You don't have to do that. So it saves you maybe 15 or 20 minutes. But anyway, he built this model and I used it as a sort of an inspiration. I need to find two sets of parts. Hang on. There we go. How many of you have ever heard of a New Hampshire modeler named Peter Tuttle? Anybody know of him? All right, he's an author. He's written a number of books. Lives we're in upstate New Hampshire somewhere. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure where he's from, but I've come across him a number of times.
Yeah, he's been modeling for a long time. He had very early stuff in the Gazette when it showed up. It began to show up in the 70s and 80s. Peter emailed me a couple of years ago and said that he had an extra set of Grant Line caboose, main 2-foot caboose parts. Would I be interested? And I emailed him back, yeah, how much? He says, $2, which was not that much more than, much less than what they cost originally. But anyway, I already had 2 cabooses, and the last thing I need is another caboose. And, but I said, what the heck, I'll go with the caboose. So this is Jimmy Dunlop's plan of Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes caboose number 552. It was the longest caboose they had. I believe it's at Edaville. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's been preserved. So I got this stuff from Peter, and I'm saying, I don't need a long caboose like that. So what can I do? So I said, all right, I'll cut the plans up and create my own version. And I did. And I cut, if you lay these on here, I cut one window off each end, basically, and brought it together and built the top version. And so I not only created my own plans, but I created my own parts. And this is the result. This is my number 52. I couldn't number it 552. That would not be legal, but it's number 52. This is all styrene, except for the platform. And I use real wood for the walkway because it worked. But the parts were all from Peter. That's the cupola windows, the side windows, the doors, the side door, the baggage doors, the end doors. I had some brass parts from a whole kit that worked perfectly for the end rails and the ladders and the trucks. If any of you are into HO scale passenger trucks, these are Walther's standard 4-wheel passenger trucks, which are wheelbase lengthwise. They're perfect for 2-foot, no scale. It's absolutely perfect. And you know, they don't look quite the same, but I'm the only one who's really going to complain, and that's that. Just for a little bit of color, my Floquil stash is pretty well dead. I haven't airbrushed a Floquil color for I don't know how long. But I found that Krylon Ready Brown spray can paint is an almost perfect match for Floatwell Boxcar Red. And that's what all of these cars, the styrene jobs, that's what they are colored with. And it's a great color. It goes on really fine. It doesn't glob up like some of the spray can stuff does. And the roof, I think, is a Krylon primer, which is almost perfect for Floatwell's grimy black. So anyway, just a little word on color.
How would you say that again, the float, Krylon,
Krylon Ruddy Brown, Ruddy, R-U-D-D. Ruddy is what, like a kind of a beat up, I don't know where it comes from, but yeah, that's Ruddy Brown. It's more of a reddish color. All right, so those are the plans from Gary Kohler, among other things. And things back together and get to my most sophisticated plan that I have. I'm gonna say, my latest project, which I just finished this past week, has very sophisticated plans. Now, any of you ever heard of Bill Jensen? He's an author who's done a lot of stuff on the main two footers, and he did back in the late 80s a tremendously detailed book on Kingfield, on the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. And when I'm talking book, I'm not talking a book like this. I'm talking literally this long and this high with a spin binding at the end. And the plans for the Kingfield Roundhouse, I saw that roundhouse when I came in, work in progress there. Kingfield Roundhouse was 3 stalls, but the plans in this book, because of the size, are full size for O scale. And on the next page was a plan for the hydrant house in the Kingfield Yard, this massive structure. I didn't want a photocopy. I mean, it's done in like, I don't know what the scale is, but the thing is like that high from here to here in the plans in the book. And I didn't want to photocopy it. I didn't need that. So I did a very detailed set of plans for the Kingfield hose house. Extremely detailed, as you can see. It's only 5 feet by 5 feet, 7 feet at the eaves, and 10 feet at the top. And I didn't know what was inside. I knew there was a hydrant. There was a drawing that showed the way the hose was stored, and it was on a steel sort of rod thing hanging from the back of the building. And I wanted to be able to show that. So very carefully pass that little sucker around. That came from an extremely sophisticated plan, but that's probably the smallest thing that I've done in a long time, but it's pretty accurate. How am I doing on time? Oh my God.
Good.
All right. 5 minutes. All right. Very quickly then, I'll pull things together. Okay, this is the Winnicook station. You saw the detail in there. It works pretty well. The other building that I brought, I was thinking on the way down, I should have, talking about plans and stuff, I should have brought a model that I did for Chris Lane several years ago. I wanted to build a model of the house that my father was born and grew up in. He was born in Brownfield, towards Freiburg, and there's one known photograph of the house. The house burned in the fire in 1947, and there's no remembrance of it. The foundation has been filled in by the people who bought the land and so forth. So, talking about plans, I had that one photo, and I was able to take the dimensions of the clapboards off the end of the photo. It's from one end looking at the rest of the house, and I came up with a set of plans that I think are pretty good. And I should have brought that. That was the one thing I forgot. But sometimes you have to. The old thing about it, if it's gone, it's gone. You can't see it. If there's something you want to build and there's no kit available, take pictures. Take pictures, make diagrams, take measurements, so forth. This is a small station. It was based on a set of plans in RMC several years ago. It's based on a small Canadian Pacific station somewhere out in, I think it was in Alberta. But I brought this just to show you that my stash of material is running a little bit low, and I try to brace things inside somewhat carefully, but as you can see, I kind of had to mess with it a little bit. It's braced and it's solid, but sometimes you have to do, I use, the wood is, the base of the roof is balsa wood. I use long pieces of styrene to keep things together. This is so you can't look from one side to the other, Big piece of styrene across to brace everything diagonally, and so that's that. Bracing is good. Sometimes you have no choice but to do it to make sure that everything stays together. And then the last thing, I showed you the O-scale version of Jack's cabin. But one of the things that during COVID, I was trying to find some things to keep doing. And the previous kit that I had that I put together of Jack's cabin was an HO. And there is a set of plans, and I don't know if I have them or not, it doesn't matter. But I came across a set of plans in HO for Jack's cabin tank. And when you're building a water tank, the key thing, as I said with this, is getting a base for the tank, getting something that you can use as a starting point for the tank in the right diameter. What do you think I used for this?
Cardboard tube,
Pardon me?
cardboard tube.
Thought about it, but I like it's all styrene. So that would have been. Say again? I've done that before. How about a pill bottle? I had a leftover from I don't know what. But it was so old, it was one of the amber colored ones that you can't even find today. That I haven't seen one for a long time. But it was the perfect diameter to laminate evergreen styrene around the outside of the pill bottle. And when you're doing something like that, make sure that and this is actually two pieces. Make sure you're very careful about where you put it together. You have it on the water gauge is a perfect place on a water tank to have the two pieces come together. The roof is I've done a lot of shingles in HO scale, but my vision is, we're all getting sort of experienced. So I took some clapboard siding, cut the pieces to fit the base of the roof, and then just took a razor blade and scribed in the individual shingles on the pieces of clapboard. And I think it looks pretty good. Careful. There we go. So that's Jack's cabin in HO. And it's supposed to be in RMC in the next couple of years.